The year was 1840, and the time was well after midnight, when two Kentucky slaves decided this was their chance to get away. There were grim and dangerous circumstances trying to get away, but fortunately for them, God had prepared a path for them. And that path took them from safe house to safe house as fast as they could travel along the Underground Railroad. That God made a way for them. And eventually, they got all the way to Canada. God had provided safe passage for them. 3 years later, God provided for them again. They had a son, and they named him Elijah. Things were going great. And 3 years later from that, they moved back to the United States, this time to Detroit. Things went wonderful. In fact, so wonderful that Elijah's father was so successful in business that years later, he was able to send his son away to Scotland to train as a mechanical engineer. How wonderful it is not only to have that freedom and to provide well for your family, but be able to provide for them the best educational opportunities that they might be set off for a wonderful future. So Elijah went to Scotland, he apprenticed in mechanical engineering, and he came back to the United States. But unfortunately, there was no work for him in his field. All of that training, all of that preparing, and things weren't going quite the way Elijah had thought they would. But God had prepared Elijah for something else. You see, he joined the Michigan Central Railroad. And he was a fireman and an oiler. See, back in those days, the train had to make frequent stops to be oiled. So, as you might imagine, that leads to some delays in travel. The train has to stop ever so often and be oiled. And he was one of the guys that did the oiling, but Elijah knew there must be a better way. So he designed, with that mechanical engineering training that he had, he designed a lubricator system so the steam engines didn't have to stop. He went on to design 42 patents for lubrication systems, as well as for other inventions. And it became wildly popular. Elijah McCoy's models, his patents, were wonderful. Now, other people, seeing his success, tried to copy his success, tried to make their own versions of these different inventions. But everybody insisted on buying Elijah's model because, and this is where we get the phrase today, there was nothing like the real McCoy. You see, Elijah might have wondered, why had God given him all of that training, all of those years as an apprentice, to put him in a job that was outside of his chosen field? But God was preparing Elijah for just the right moment. He put him in the right place at the right time to change the world. God was preparing him in a different way. There had been all of this godly provision all along the way, freeing his parents, making his father successful in business, giving him that apprenticeship. And then just like when it seemed like the provision had worn out, Elijah couldn't get a job in his field, provision hadn't worn out, God transitioned him to a different portion of his plan. And Elijah McCoy became a famous inventor, a household name. And he would put that training and all those years to good use. Because you see, God doesn't waste anything. God doesn't throw it away. This morning we're going to look at the Israelites at a time when their forefathers and Moses had died on the way to the Promised Land. And now they have a new generation of people. And they have a new leader, Joshua. And they're about to cross over into that Promised Land. They're on the edge of something great. They can see it. They can almost taste it. You see, God has been preparing them for this moment all along. And He has been feeding them out here in the desert with a thing called manna. Now, manna is when God delivered from heaven. It would fall from the sky The Bible says it looked like the color of resin. It tasted like coriander seed. It was a little bit like a bread. They could put it together and make little cakes out of it. And so you think about it. This generation of Israelites, not their forefathers who had come along before them and had griped and complained through the desert, but this generation, manna's all they knew. Now, I imagine at some point, going through the desert, maybe they got their hands on a rare fruit or vegetable, maybe they were able to kill some kind of animal, but for the most part, breakfast, lunch, and dinner is manna. That's what you're eating, and that's all you've ever known. And now they're about to go through this major transition. They're about to go into the promised land. Things are going to change dramatically for them. The way that things are about to become the way things used to be. And it's going to take some getting used to. And I wonder how many of you this morning are going through some kind of transition. And what you were relying upon once is now gone. Your comfort, your sustenance, that thing, that person, that opportunity that you thought would always be there has vanished. The flow of the river has stopped. We're going to find this morning that sometimes when God stops feeding you manna, it's because He has something better in store for you. And sometimes when He stops the flow of the river, it's only so that you can pass through on dry ground to the other side where God is pointing the way. We're going to start this morning looking at Joshua chapter 1. And we're going to look at the entire chapter here in chapter 1 because it builds up a lot about what we're going to talk about all the way up to chapter 5. Joshua chapter 1, starting with the first verse. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people, get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give to them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon and from the great river the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So Joshua ordered the officers of the people, go through the camp and tell the people, get your provisions ready. 3 days from now you will cross the Jordan here to go in and take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you for your own. But to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, remember the command that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you after he said, the Lord your God will give you rest by giving you this land. Your wives, your children, and your livestock may stay in the land that Moses gave you east of the Jordan, but all your fighting men, ready for battle, must cross over ahead of your fellow Israelites. You are to help them until the Lord gives them rest, as he has done for you, and until they too have taken possession of the land the Lord your God is giving them. After that you may go back and occupy your own land, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you east of the Jordan, towards the sunrise. Then they answered Joshua, whatever you have commanded us we will do, and wherever you send us we will go. Just as we fully obeyed Moses, so will we obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your word and does not obey it, whatever you command them will be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. So let's take a look at this chapter real quick before we move on. Moses knows that he cannot lead these people forever, and he prepares Joshua, his assistant. Now you might remember an earlier story where Moses sent out 12 spies. And those spies came back with a bad report. We can't take this land. But 2 of them came back with a good report. Joshua and Caleb. Believing fully that God would fulfill his promises, that he had promised to give them the land, they said, we surely can take this land. So Joshua is one of the 2 people who had faith in the situation. Joshua has been prepared for this moment. Moses led a rebellious people through the wilderness on the way to the promised land. And if we skip ahead in chapter 5, we learn that all of the fighting men from that time period, they're all dead. And Moses has died, and now it's a new generation, and it's a new leader, and it's a very different culture because they're no longer in the wilderness surviving to get to the promised land. Now they're about to go into the promised land. A lot of things are going to change. One chapter is closing, another chapter is beginning. They're in a period of transition in their leadership and their culture and everything. Everything is about to change. God tells Joshua that he will be with him just as he was with Moses. And he tells them several times in this passage, be strong and courageous. Be strong and very courageous. And Joshua sends men through the camp to tell them to get their provisions ready. Now there's something a little different going on here if you look at the New King James Version of this, where it says, get your victuals ready. Now I know none of us here speak the King's English, but we have a word in our language here in the South we got from victuals, victuals. We're all on the same page now. And we know what victuals are. We all know what that is. So get your victuals ready. Pack a lunch. Because God is sending you out on the battlefield. He's about to give you the victory, but you need to eat a good big meal before you go out into this battle that you're about to win. It sounds similar to the scene when God freed his people from captivity in Egypt, where they got their provisions ready, they got their bread ready, but they were in such a hurry they didn't have time to bake it. So they left with it in their bag, and the sun baked it, and that's why they have the hard flatbread that we know in Passover. So the scene is kind of mirrored. Hey, get ready. Get your provisions ready. Pack a lunch. You're going to need your energy because we're about to go out, and God is giving us the land. We see here, too, there's a callback to an earlier part of the journey where God had given several tribes rest to say, okay, the rest of the tribes are going to go out and take this part of the promised land. But this section over here, east of the Jordan River, you tribes get to live there. But you can set your families down there, your wives, your children, put your pets up there. Go ahead and put a mailbox out there, a little flag with your name on it. Go ahead and get settled because you're going to be back. But all your fighting men need to come over here and help your fellow man conquer the land so that they might have rest just as you have rest. They helped you conquer where you're going to live. You're going to help them conquer where they're going to live. And there's this sense of confidence, right? Because go ahead and settle down because you're going to come back home. You have somewhere to come back to because God's promises will be fulfilled. That there's no worry here. And all the people of this generation seem a lot more on board than the people that we read about in the book of Exodus. They say, wherever you say to go, we're going to go. Whatever you say to do, we're going to do. If anyone tries to put a stop to God's plan, we're going to stop them. And they repeat at the very end of this chapter what God has been saying all along. Only be strong and courageous. So in chapter 1, we see this boldness. There's a boldness in the leadership. There's a boldness in the people. They fully believe God is about to do great things. And we're on board. Whatever, wherever, whenever. Let's go. Let's do this. We know that we can trust on God. In chapter 2, Joshua sends out 2 spies who bring out a good report. And again, it must be kind of ironic that Joshua once was a spy and now he is sending out spies. It's a very different story. They come back with a good report. In chapter 3, God parts the water of the Jordan for Joshua and the Israelites, just as he had parted the Red Sea for Moses and their ancestors long ago. In chapter 4, the people make a monument to this miracle. When they get on the other side of the Red Sea, they make a monument with several stones to this miracle that God had done so future generations can see it. And again, there's the confidence here. Why would you build a memorial for future generations unless you know with confidence that you will have future generations and you're going to take the land and you're going to come back and say, look at what God did here that brought us over here. They're fully confident in God's plan. They're going ahead and it's almost like planning the victory party. They're already putting up the memorial. In the last verse of chapter 4, we read, He did this so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God. So now we're in chapter 5, this generation of Israelites has not yet been circumcised. And circumcision in that period of time was a sign that you belonged to God. It was, you're set apart, as special for God. So they haven't yet been circumcised, so they go ahead and get circumcised, which is they're identifying with their covenant before God. They're claiming his promise. They're identifying that, yes, we are his people, and we are getting prepared for what God is about to do. This is about them identifying with God and them preparing for what's next. We know God's about to do something wonderful, so we're going to go ahead and get ready. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the process of circumcision this morning, but we'll just suffice it to say, for an adult man, that had to have been a very painful and uncomfortable situation. But it was necessary because they're being prepared, they're being set apart. Now, they're going to stay in the camp for a little while they heal, while they recover, before they go into the battle. Now, let me ask you this morning. How many of you has God ever done something in your life that was painful? It was uncomfortable. Could it be that he was preparing you for something great? Sometimes when we finish a process, God lets us heal up. God lets us rest up after a trial. I wonder how many of you this morning, you've been through a trial at some point in your life and you came out on the other side and God granted you a period of rest. I wonder how many of you have ever experienced that, where you got a chance to just kind of catch your breath and to recover. And isn't that great? When you've been begging God for that trial to end, and when it's in, and you just kind of, thank you, Jesus, that it's over with. And you just kind of catch your breath and you recover spiritually, maybe physically, you just recover. But you know what can happen then? Is that we can be tempted to stay in the camp forever. They were staying here in the camp to heal and to recover. And I wonder metaphorically how many of us were tempted to stay in the camp past the allotted time to recover. We might say to ourselves, after we're healed from whatever trial that was, we might say, I just need a little bit more time to recover from what I went through. How many of us say that every morning when we hit that snooze button? I just need a little bit more time to recover from yesterday. Maybe you remember how yesterday was. You say, I'm not ready for today. What if it's like yesterday? Let me just stay in the bed just a few more minutes. Let me just stay in the camp a little while longer. While they were in the camp, Passover rolls around. They celebrate the Passover. But this particular holiday, this time when they celebrate Passover, it's different than the way they have been celebrating Passover. Because you see, they have been eating manna that's fallen from the sky. That's your breakfast, that's your lunch, that's your dinner. Now, I don't know to what extent they ever got their hands on something else. I imagine at some point they probably ran across some wild berries or some fruit or something growing wild that they got their hands on. But for the vast majority of the time, our indications are most of their meals, this is just manna. If you can scrounge up something, you're eating manna. This is how God kept them fed. They're relying upon this every day for all their meals, is this food that God drops from heaven. You walk out of your tent open-handed or with something to catch it in because you know God's provision is on the way. So every day you're going out there. Full expectation. God's going to provide for yet another day. We've all heard that phrase, hand to mouth, where you're living, you're just barely getting by, you're getting just enough for that day. That's the way they're living. And in total faith, hand to mouth, that God is going to provide today like he did yesterday and the day before, and God's going to continue to provide. This manna is always going to be there. But look down in verses 10 through 12. On the evening of the 14th day of the month, while camped at Gilgal on the plains of Jericho, the Israelites celebrated the Passover. The day after the Passover, that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened bread and roasted grain. The manna stopped the day after they ate this food from the land. There was no longer any manna for the Israelites, but that year they ate the produce of Canaan. So suddenly there's no more manna. They've been relying upon this manna, but there's no more of it. There's no more bread from heaven. Now, why did God stop providing for them this manna right as they were about to go into the promised land? You ever lay out a plan and you're relying upon certain assumptions, certain things you just expect there as you lay out your plan, and then something unexpected happens? the money runs out, that a relationship ends abruptly, someone gets sick, someone dies, something breaks down. Maybe you feel like you're breaking down. You've been relying upon that manna. You might say, God, I need that manna. I need the security of knowing it's always going to be there. This upsets my whole routine if you take away the manna. I'm relying upon it. And God says into your heart, I know. I know you're relying upon it. That's why I stopped it. You see, the Israelites who didn't get much outside of manna, now they're eating food, other food they're not used to. Imagine, all you've ever had are rice cakes. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. All you ever had your whole life are rice cakes. And you're happy with the rice cakes. You thank God you have the rice cakes and you've been provided for. Rice cakes from heaven all day long. Every once in a while, we were going through the desert, you manage to find some kind of spice, some kind of herb, you kind of flavor it up a little bit. You say to your neighbor, hey buddy, check this out. Now I have cinnamon rice cakes. Pretty exciting day. You get a little vanilla. Now you have some vanilla rice cake. You get a hold of some maple syrup. I know we're in the desert, but go with me here. You get some maple syrup, and you're licking your lips at night because you know in the morning you're going to wake up and say, I'm going to have maple syrup flavored rice cakes. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. I'm looking forward to it. So you're perfectly happy. But now you find yourself in a new place. You've got new options. And someone serves up for you a meal. They give you a little bit of fried chicken. Maybe some watermelon. Some mac and cheese. Turnip greens. I know y'all are hungry with me, but stay with me. And God says, there's more where that came from. I'm glad you like the rice cake. I'm glad you're appreciative of it. But there's more food where that came from. You just got to go over this hill. You just got to go all along my road, my path for you, where I've called you to go. That was just a little snack to tide you over. I've got a feast prepared for you right around the bend. I recall with my own children how happy they were for a little bit of baby food. Certain ones that were not their favorites, but certain ones, man, they loved those certain kinds of baby food. At least until they saw what mommy and daddy were eating. And I'll never forget the looks on their faces, and I know you've all seen this, right? Anyone of you who ever raised children, grandchildren, that look on their face when their eyes get big and they kind of smack their lips. Yeah, they're watching what you're doing, and suddenly what was in front of them that was the most appealing thing is not so appealing anymore. They're kind of, reaching out for it. When they got old enough to try solid food for themselves, there was no going back. Neither of my children have ever said to me, you know what, I mean, this is good and all, but I'd rather go back to the baby food. Nobody ever says that. No, the baby food was just simply preparation for something better. It was transitional to get them where we wanted them to be. Once they had a taste of the real food, we took that away. I like the way one preacher says of this story. He says that God sends you a bridge to cross over to the promised land, but some of us choose to live on that bridge. Only the homeless live under a bridge, but we have a home and it's right over here. Why would we choose to live on the bridge? See, if the manna had kept flowing, if God hadn't given his people a taste of what was to come, their mouths probably wouldn't have been watering for it. If they didn't have the motivation, they might have been tempted to stay in the camp. But now they hunger and they thirst for something more. Christian, do you have an active and vibrant walk with God? Or are you still living off that mountaintop experience you had years ago? That's a little like someone, we've all met people like this who are in their 40s or 50s and they can't stop talking about that game-winning touchdown they scored in high school. That's great, buddy, but it's time to move on. It's time to establish some new experiences. Do you love the provision of God more than the God who provides? Do you find your comfort in having that manna in your hand more than you find comfort in putting your hand in the hand of God? Would you rather live on the bridge or cross over it? Jesus tells us in the Lord's Prayer that we should ask God to give us this, our daily bread. He also tells us not to worry about what we will eat. He goes on to tell us that He is the bread of life, and whoever goes to Him will never grow hungry. Now, drawing from the story of Moses and the Israelites eating that bread from heaven, Jesus tells the people gathered around that He is the true bread come to save those who look to him and believe in him. Now, when I look at all those verses together and what that all means, looking at Scripture in context, I think we rely upon God every day to give us our daily bread, but then we stop worrying about it. But more importantly, we rely upon God to give us more and more of himself because he is our bread. The hand that provides is more important than what he has provided. That we choose to love God more than what he gives to us, even when it's our provision, our security. The bread before was temporary. It was transitional. But Jesus is the true bread. The bread of Jesus Christ. That's forever. He continues in John chapter 6, starting with verse 48. I am the bread of life. Your ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, yet they died. But here is the bread that comes down from heaven, which anyone may eat and not die. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever. This bread is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world. If you don't know Jesus as the one who died for your sins, you'd say, I haven't had that bread. I beg of you to come into that today. Trust me when I say that the bread that Jesus gives you is better than any other bread. He is the true bread, meaning he has served up his life for the world. He has put himself out on the platter, so to speak. And that if we would trust in his sacrifice to be in charge of our life, to come into our hearts and to lead us, and to forgive us our sins, we might be filled up forever. If you know God, but you haven't yet joined a church, we'd love to have you. I hope you have gathered that we are a very casual, very loving church. We try to keep the main thing the main thing. We love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love our neighbor as ourselves. There's just nothing like the fellowship of believers who are gathered together in his church. Maybe today you're struggling because the source of your sustenance has been cut off. That which you relied upon daily is gone. It's vanished. Just know that perhaps God has something better for you just around the bend. Maybe he was just preparing for you. You don't need that temporary solution anymore because you're about to cross over into the promised land. Maybe you've had a taste of what could be if you'll just follow the one who has prepared the way, the one who can part the waters for you so that you can walk through on dry land to the other side in his will. I'd love to speak with you today about whatever it is the Lord leads as he lays it upon your heart. We invite you to come forward during this final song for prayer, perhaps to join the church, maybe to say that you're prepared to lay down the manna and pick up the promise. Won't you please come forward as God leads during this final song?